Content note. This collection includes non-graphic descriptions of violence, abduction, and disturbing scenes that occurred in remote places. I spent 15 years as a forest ranger. I learned the names of trees, the habits of weather, and how people behave when the light goes thin and the trail signs fade. What I did not learn from the manuals were the small ways the woods can become a courtroom where everything ordinary is judged and sometimes found guilty. Stay with me until the end. If these true ranger stories matter to you, subscribe, hit the bell, and leave a like. The first time I felt a holiday go wrong, it was a Thanksgiving weekend that felt like every other in my memory. A long gray drive through hardwoods, a pack of volunteers and seasonal workers, the smell of damp leaves pressed under the boots of men who thought they were doing the right thing. I was 30, new to the district, assigned to the eastern trailhead alone for the night while the rest of the crew took a poorly lit cabin near the river. The ranger station was a converted two-room post with a wood stove and a map pinned to the wall. I remember the kettle clicking thinly on the stove and the radio's hiss when the frequency between dispatch calls went quiet. At about 7 that evening, a call came in from a hiker who said something like, "There's a light at cabin 3, nobody's supposed to be there." I took the truck. The road narrowed to gravel, to ruts, then to the worn track rangers call the sled line. The sky folded into that deep, early kind of dark that makes all the low branches look like reaching hands. I took the last bend and saw the cabin. The back porch lantern was lit, casting a single pool of yellow across stacked firewood. The smell of turkey smoke hung faintly, as if someone had tried to cook inside a building whose heart had already been chilled. I knocked on the door. It opened before I had a chance to call out. A man sat at the kitchen table, perfectly still, hands folded as if in a photograph. The table had been set for a meal, plates, a small half-packed pie dish, 3 chairs. The man wore a denim jacket, his eyelids down. He smelled like smoke and cheap cologne. My first thought was that he had passed out. I stepped inside and the floorboard hummed under my weight. Then I realized the mess on the floor near his boots wasn't a spill, but a smear where paint had been dragged. He looked up slowly, with a sort of polite confusion, and that was when the hair on my arms went taut. He wasn't alone. Behind the curtain that divided the sleeping loft was a figure crouched, eyes bright in the lamplight. A woman or a small man, I couldn't tell, hands tied at the wrists. When I said, "Hey, are you all right?" the sound of my voice made the still man smile too quickly, like someone playing a part. He said, "Just having dinner, Ranger. You want to join?" There was a knife on the table, clean and ordinary. I felt my hand go to my radio by reflex, and the knot of fear in my stomach recognized the look of people who had rehearsed guilt into manners. I didn't let my voice shake. I called for backup and told them to come slow. While I waited, the man became talkative, too talkative, asking about permits and trail closures, diverting the conversation like a hand shuffling cards. The person behind the curtain began making staccato noises, a low tapping that grew until the man said, He's nervous. Don't make a scene." When the other ranger's headlights finally cut the trees into white lines, the man suddenly stood and lunged for the loft with a speed that didn't match the sleep-laden conversation he had been giving me. The struggle was brief, chaotic in the cramped space. I remember the sound of the plate hitting the floor, the bite of glass at bare feet, the smell of burning pie. We unbound the person in the loft, shaken, panicked but alive. The man at the table was arrested that night. Evidence in trunks and a hidden sleeping bag, and the way he had marked the cabin with tape, someone had noticed that later, sitting in the station with coffee cooling, meant the district attorney had what he needed. I still dream sometimes about the table laid as if for family, and how easy it is to set a place for terror where trust lives. Afterward, the rescued person moved away. I took a leave for a week and drove to the coast because the trees in that district always sounded the same, waves. I learned that holidays can be a bait. The lesson I took into the next season wasn't heroic, it was practical. Never trust the comfort of a lamp alone. A different November, about 3 years later, I was on patrol on an access road that runs like a vein between two old logging fields. The wind came through the switches and made the saplings lean. At dusk, I found a small boy walking the shoulder, a red backpack swallowed by his thin shoulders. He looked like he had walked for miles. His mouth was red from colder wind, and his nose was an attentive, raw pink. He told me his mother had gone to visit a relative, and he had wandered, and a man had offered him a ride, and then insisted he get out at a turnout. He said it casually, the way children tell adults facts they think shouldn't trouble anyone. There was a truck parked under the pines, idling. When I asked him if he knew the truck, his eyes slid to the brush and back, like he was reading an invisible script. I called dispatch. The boy's small hands clutched the strap of his pack so tight I could see the knuckles whiten. While we waited, he told me about a shed with a rusted swing and a candy tin that people used to bury for treasure hunts. His voice was a mixture of bravado and a long, soft tiredness. He thought he had done something wrong for being lost. He didn't seem to know the words abduction or kidnapping. He thought of it as a wrong turn. The driver of the truck came back, angry and loud, and his anger didn't fit the pallor of the boy's fear. It sounded like someone whose annoyance had been turned into entitlement. I stepped between them. He said he's old enough to know better, and then his words went slotted, like a machine with a stuck cog. I remember his belt, brown leather with marks, and the way he kept his hands near his pockets, as if he needed to be ready for something besides speech. When my radio called the county, the man's face changed. He tried to insist the boy was his nephew and that the boy had run off. The boy's eyes, when they met mine, were the kind that didn't lie because the child didn't yet have a vocabulary for hiding. He said he wanted to drive farther, and I saw a flinch at the man that read like a memory. The officers who arrived took statements, and later the vehicle was searched. They found a stash of children's clothing, some ID cards with names of other boys. It was ugly and methodical in a way that left my hands shaking for an hour after I handed in my report. The boy was reunited with his family. Later I learned the man had been convicted on multiple counts after a longer investigation connected similar pickups along the route. For years after, whenever I passed that turnout, I kept my headlights on high and my doors locked, not because the woods were more dangerous, but because the ordinary places where kids waited for rides could become the most treacherous. There is one encounter I still call the Thanksgiving of the Candles, because no other detail has lasted in my memory the way the image of a dozen taper flames does. We got a call from hikers who said they found smoke near an old fire tower off a service road that was normally locked. The tower had been abandoned long before I arrived. Nobody worked there, but families sometimes parked near it for the view. The trail to it climbed through a stand of old pines where the needles fall in fat carpets. The closer I got, the more I noticed how the air lost its bite and became thick with something ancient. The smell of resin and something else, wax, and an undertow of old tallow. The ribbon gate was cut. On the platform, someone had set a long wooden table and draped it with a cloth. The table was arranged with plates and bowls and a center wreath of evergreen. Candles burned in a line, not wild but precise, their flames steady despite the wind that threaded through the tower. There were footprints leading away into the trees, single sets, as if whoever left did so in a hurry. Around one chair, someone had placed a small pair of children's shoes. The sight was a ruin, charming in the way only an intentional display can be. Domestic ritual made bizarre by location. I remember running my finger along a plate rim, finding a smear of ash. The arrangement felt like a message. There was no one in view, but there was fresh cigarette ash and an empty thermos. The hikers who had called said they felt watched. They were right. What struck me was not so much any evidence of criminality that night, but the sense of planning. Someone had chosen that tower deliberately because it had an audience reduced to sky and trees, because the isolation made spectators unlikely and made any ritual complete in a dangerous way. Months later, a group of teenagers were arrested for a string of pranks and trespassing in that district. The tower dinner turned out to be part of a dare culture ritual that had slipped into something more reckless. No one was hurt, but the image of a table set for people who were not there became a symbol for me. Where there should have been laughter, there had been a comfortable darkness pretending to be hospitality. I learned to keep a flashlight in my coat even on evenings that felt celebratory, because light exposes the pretense. The fourth encounter was quieter in a way that made the aftermath louder. I was on a night shift in the fire season. The air had the metallic taste of smoke that refuses to be wished away, even in rain. Our bunkhouse hosted seasonal crews. 12 beds, a shared kitchen, a whiteboard with chores, and a hand-drawn map of hazards. I woke to a whisper at my door, soft, careful. I thought it might be one of the youth who'd come in late. I opened the door to a dark figure in a hood, lighter held like a signal. He moved with the kind of calculated patience I associate with people who practice being quiet. He slipped past me before I could do much beyond greeting. He asked if anyone had seen his friend, and his voice was thin. There was nothing in his posture to betray malice until he reached for the supply cabinet and produced a small knife as if retrieving a tool. I told him to put it down. He smiled at me like a man who expected compliance. Then he said, "Nobody will even notice if one bag goes missing." I felt the room shrink. The trainees slept in the back room in the sort of exhausted heap that leaves people vulnerable. I thought of every safety briefing I had given about watching your gear and not trusting unknown people at campsites. He moved like someone practiced at taking what isn't theirs and getting away. I called the lead on the radio and kept him talking, asking about where his friend had gone, making time. He had a story for everything. He had names and places. Behind him, the kettle began to whistle because someone had knocked it on in their sleep. The sound fractured his composure. When the deputy arrived, the man tried to run, but the trainees, awakened by the commotion, were quick and angry in their own right. He was caught and charged not only for theft, but for possession of a weapon in a restricted area. What was frightening was how normal he had seemed at first, an easy smile, a rehearsed sadness, until the rhythm of his day revealed its jagged edges. Afterward, we installed stricter sign-in rules, and I started asking people to lock their bags in the truck, even if it seemed like overkill. The woods teach you that courtesy can be a risk when you forget caution. The last story stays with me because it involved a colleague, and the betrayal felt personal in a way the others never did. He was older than me by a decade, a man who had been a volunteer before earning his badge, who loved an early season and a pot of coffee that was always too weak. We shared a bench and a thermos more times than I can count. One Thanksgiving, a call came in about people who had gone missing from a remote hunting access in a neighboring county. The county asked for manpower, and our man volunteered enthusiastically. He was the one who knew the marsh roads like the back of his hand. We searched for days. The missing people were a family, a couple in their 60s and their grandchild. The first day we found scattered clothing and a child's toy in the reeds. The second day we found tracks that led to a service road and stopped. The third day we found a vehicle abandoned and keys on a dashboard. The lead agency called in cadaver dogs and divers. It is one thing to hear those phrases in radio chatter. It is another to stand on the shore and hear a dog whine as its handler points and says, "Here." Weeks later, arrests were made, not in the way I had expected. The man we trusted was accused of tampering with evidence after the fact. He hadn't been part of the initial disappearance in the sense of being the assailant, but he had the misfortune of arriving at the scene early, of moving items to preserve them, of making notes in a private log that conflicted with the official timeline. He denied wrongdoing. He said he had only wanted to help. The prosecutors said otherwise. The courts said otherwise. There was a trial, dry and bureaucratic, and then a sentence that did not feel like closure. What haunted me most was not the legal outcome. It was the erosion of certainty. Holidays should be a place of common rituals, and here, in service and station, a ritual of care had cracked. After that, I stopped assuming my colleagues could be the last word in truth. I learned to write my own notes, to photograph scenes before moving anything, to hold my trust lightly and my documentation firmly. The family who had been missing were found, eventually, and their recovery was a slow, quiet thing. They left the district, and I can't blame them. There are small things I carry with me. I carry the smell of pie where it shouldn't be, the way a lit candle can be a beacon or a trap, the image of a child gripping a backpack too tightly. I also carry a kind of slow tenderness for the people who work these woods, their grief, their stubbornness to keep showing up. If there is a single thread through these encounters, it is this. The forest gives you enough solitude to think you are alone, and that is where people with bad intentions can find space to practice normal things they will use to deceive. Thanksgiving is only one calendar day, but the idea of it, a table, a flicker of light, the expectation of safety, persists all year. If I have a warning, it is simple and small. Keep a light on in your life, literal and figurative. Lock the truck. Question an invitation that feels off. Teach children the language of stranger danger in ways that leave them able to call for help. Document what you find. Trust your instincts, even when they seem petty or paranoid. Thank you for listening to these 5 true ranger encounters and for taking a moment to let them change how you look at an ordinary evening in the woods. If these stories raised a chill, please subscribe and share this collection so more people can stay alert. If any of my descriptions stirred up painful memories for you, reach out to local support resources and know that help exists. For more first-person accounts from people who keep watch in the quiet places, hit subscribe, leave a like, and ring the bell. There are more stories that need an audience. People sometimes ask why I keep doing it, why I go back out into the dark, why I volunteer for holiday shifts when there are warm houses and casseroles waiting. It is not heroic. It is stubbornness mixed with an old-fashioned sense of duty. It is also because, for all its dangers, the work occasionally returns something so small and so necessary that you cannot imagine giving it up. A family reunited at dawn. A hiker's relief when you hand them a warm blanket. A note left on your truck thanking you for showing up. Those moments anchor you. After the trial, my routines hardened in ways that felt both sensible and sad. I learned to photograph first, to note everything twice, to write like someone else might read my words and make a life-or-death decision from them. I started teaching those habits to the new volunteers who drifted in. Kids with fresh boots and bright faces, older people who had time and a need to be useful, veterans who needed the silence of the woods more than they admitted. I do not preach. I show them a notebook, the angle of a photograph that makes a footprint legible, the small, nearly invisible signs that a child has been here. One November, a thin, earnest volunteer named Rosa found a mitten at the edge of a logging trail. It was nothing remarkable, a child's mitten caked in brown reed mud. She called me from the truck, voice low and careful. "Should I collect it?" she asked. The question mattered because it revealed how she saw the job, either as a series of errands or as a ledger where every tiny object could be evidence or solace. We waited until we could kneel and photograph, until the light hit the threads in a way that made the size and fabric clear. Then we bagged it, labeled it, and kept moving. A week later, the mitten turned into a map. It led to a hollow where a young boy had hidden while his grandparents searched for him in a panic. The reunion was not cinematic, it was muffled and breathless. A woman collapsing into her husband's muddy chest, while the boy clung to the mitten as if it were a talisman. Rosa sat on a log and cried quietly. None of us said anything that needed saying. It was the kind of small rescue that convinced you the work mattered in ways statistics could not capture. Those moments do not erase the betrayals. They live alongside them, like 2 seasons pressing into the same year. I carry both. The older colleague, the one with the constant thermos and the marsh road wisdom, became a lesson in faith and its limits. I visited him once after his sentence began, not because I thought I could fix anything, but because rituals require witnessing. He had always been a man of routine, Behind the glass of his visitor windows, he made tea with shaking hands and handed me a folded paper, a page of notes from before the trial. He insisted his movements had been to protect the scene. Whether that was true, whether he had panicked or rationalized, remained something the court decided and something my conscience argued with in private. We spoke about small things. He asked after people we both knew. He told me about a pot of coffee in the morning sun and how the sunlight in the yard made the frost look like spun glass. He did not ask me for absolution. I did not give it. There is a mercy that does not require forgetting. There is a distance that kindness can keep without softening accountability. In the years since, I have watched the district change in tiny ways. More marked signs at trailheads, laminate placards with emergency numbers, a volunteer coordinator who keeps an email list and asks people to sign waivers. The essentials stay the same: the weather, the mud, the way a sound can mean danger, but bureaucracy and habit add layers. Sometimes those layers protect, sometimes they confuse. We adapt. We learn to move within both. At home, holidays became less about perfection and more about small rituals that feel like anchors. Lighting a candle and leaving it near the window, making sure the truck keys are where they will be found, keeping a sandwich bag of spare gloves in the console. I stopped assuming everyone arriving to my table had the same idea of safety. I learned to ask questions that sound petty and necessary. Who drove here? Did you tell anyone your route? Is your phone charged? The questions are not meant to be weapons. They are invitations to be mindful, to make the ordinary acts of care habit. There is also tenderness. People bring pies after long searches. A neighbor once left a thermos of coffee on my porch with a note, "Thanks for being on call." The note made me think of the way small kindnesses cross back and forth between those who keep watch and those who are watched. We are a community of patchwork support, not a machine. Sometimes my mind returns to the family we found. They moved away from the county, as people do after trauma. I cannot blame them. But months later a letter arrived. Handwritten, the child's scrawl a leaning, lopsided loop. And inside was a pressed leaf and a few words. "We are okay. Thank you." It was not an absolution for anything, nor should it have been. It was simply an acknowledgement that in the tangle of fear and bureaucracy and human error, someone had kept watch, and that watching had mattered. I try to teach that to others without sermonizing. When a new volunteer asks me what the job is really like, I do not start with the worst stories. I speak of the small routines that keep you from making the worst mistakes. Photograph before you move anything. Label the bag. Keep your notes legible, and, above all, trust your body's alarms. If something nags at you, follow it. If something makes you uneasy, let it alter your plan. We cannot expect perfection from people. We can expect prudence. There are rituals for children too. I talk to parents about teaching a child their full name and a number they can call, about creating a phrase or code for emergencies among family members that changes each season. We play small games that make them practice saying their address, or dialing a number, or repeating a password. Children learn through repetition, and repetition is what keeps a flame lit when panic wants to blow it out. On clear nights, I still drive the old roads, headlights carving white paths through fog, radio low. Sometimes I stop at a favorite bend and step out to breathe the cold air. The stars are sharp above the pines. There is a kind of music those small moments make. The creak of saplings, the distant hum of insects even into the colder months, the faraway bark of a dog. They remind me why we keep a light on. Not because light defeats darkness entirely, but because it reduces the spaces where evil can practice going unseen. Light is a practical thing. It is also a metaphor. Keep both on. If there is one last piece of advice I would pass forward to anyone who listens, it is this: hold your tenderness and your caution together. The world needs people who can care without being naive, and people who can be wary without becoming cruel. Keep a notebook. Lock your truck. Teach your children their names and how to call for help. Keep a thermos of coffee in the truck, not because it is heroic, but because in a long night, a warm cup can steady a hand and a mind. I lock the truck now, as I always have. I leave a small light on in the kitchen window when I go out at dusk. I teach the new volunteers how to fold evidence bags and how to make tea that is not too weak. I answer the calls when they come, and I carry with me the small, odd scents and images that come from work near the water. Pie where it shouldn't be, a child's backpack clutched like a talisman, the smell of peat and smoke. They are the parts of the job that rarely make the news, but that shape the days. When the season turns and the leaves fall, there will be a new class of volunteers with fresh boots and clean notebooks. I will show them the margin where caution meets care. I will teach them the first thing, that being a guardian is less about being unshakable and more about showing up again after you have been shaken. That, in the end, is what keeps a small world safe. People who keep their lights on, who lock their doors, who ask the small, necessary questions, and who choose, day after day, to be present. I stand at the tailgate, tucking the thermos back into its well-worn place. The woods are waiting, indifferent and true. I walk into the cold with a flashlight in my pocket and a notebook in my hand, and I keep watch. The flashlight is small and hot in my palm. It throws a tight cone of white that the cold eats back in minutes. My breath comes out in small clouds that scatter like the ash of old fires. The path is familiar, roots that snag a boot, a stone that rolls underfoot, the low notch in the fence where foxes go through. I keep my steps measured. Habit has taught me to move like this, slow enough to notice, steady enough not to startle whatever might be sleeping. The woods are quieter than they were in summer. The insects have retreated, and even the owls call less. Yet there is always a sound that slips through. A twig snapping a distance away, a car passing somewhere beyond the rise, a faint human noise that might be a TV, or laughter, or a frustrated child. I listen until the sound defines itself, then catalog it in my head, harmless or worth checking. Tonight it is a rustle near the picnic area, by the old pavilion where the paint is gone and graffiti has been half washed away by someone with a conscience and little money. I move toward it, flashlight tracing the bark and the litter of leaves. Two volunteers, Maya and Daniel, stand under the pavilion with their hoods up. They are young enough that cold seems a novelty to them. They laugh once, a sound that is almost a relief. "Sorry," Maya says when she sees me, the words rising like steam. "We thought we heard someone. It was probably a raccoon." Daniel lifts his chin at the pavilion floor. "We checked the trail," he says. "No tracks deeper than the mud puddle. We did the sweep and the perimeter. We're leaving a note on the bulletin board." These are the small, mechanical things that hold the big world together. A sweep done carefully, a perimeter traced and retraced, a note left where someone else can see it in daylight. I nod without pride, because pride is the wrong medicine. Approval would only risk swagger. What matters is their habit of doing the mundane things well. We stand for a while under the pavilion, the three of us, passing a thermos between them. It is too hot to drink at first, then just right. I ask about the family from last spring, the one with the child who sent the pressed leaf. Maya coughs and looks away for a moment. "They left a message in the mailbox," she says, "before we went on patrol. Old woman down the road said they moved near the river. We thought it might be them, the little boy with the lopsided handwriting. She said they were quiet and kept to themselves." She folds her hands around the cup as if it will blow away. "We left a card at their old place. I wanted to know, if they're okay." "Sometimes that is all we get," I tell her. "A leaf, a card, a name that finds a home again." I do not say that sometimes we get nothing at all. We are careful with that truth. It can be a weight that pinions young shoulders. We walk the path back toward the trucks in a line that keeps the light circling the trees. The volunteer program has rules about splitting up and about keeping each other in sight. It is less show than safeguard. My body remembers the routes so well I could walk them with my eyes shut. I do not, because eyes are the most honest part of this work. By the time we round the bend, the sky has become the color of old coins. Headlights flash from the trucks, and other pairs of boots are already marching toward the field house. The new group for the season is larger than I expected. There is a nurse from the clinic, a man who once drove a logging truck, a teacher, and a college student with a camera that she insists is just for learning light. They carry notepads and resolve. They carry other things too, the ache of whatever brought them into this work, the hunger to be useful again. I stand at the doorway while they go through the motions. Badges taped to laps, names said out loud so they stick, gloves checked for holes. I watch the way they listen when one of the older volunteers, Ellen, who has done this work longer than any of us, begins to set down the rules. Ellen does not shout. Her voice is small and precise, like a pair of shears cutting cloth. The first thing, she says, is to be steady. The second thing is to be kind. You will learn to do both at the same time, but you must not hurry the learning. If you are kind without steadiness, you will be taken. If you are steady without kindness, you will be cruel. She looks at each face as if the words were seeds she wanted to make sure landed in good soil. Then she hands me a small packet of cards, index cards with little scenarios scribbled on them. They are the exercises we use: how to approach a family, how to ask if a child knows their address, how to secure a scene until the proper people arrive. They look like basic questions, almost stupid in their simplicity. But every time I watch someone practice them, I see new angles, new ways that human dignity can be preserved by a single careful question. I take the thermos from Ellen and offer it to the new woman with the camera. She accepts with a laugh and a nervous swallow. Her hands shake only a little. "What if I freeze?" she asks. "Then breathe," I say. "You breathe and you speak. People listen to the rhythm of your breath as much as to the words. Keep it even." Training ends with a mock scenario at the edge of the field house. We scatter into roles: the distressed parent, the frightened child, the volunteer who must make a decision. There is no pretense about drama. The scenarios are short and blunt, meant to give muscle memory rather than perfect acting. Maya is chosen as the volunteer who must find a child's backpack and decide whether to call the number inside. She opens it with gloves and finds a tangle of crayons, a snack wrapper, and a note with a child's scribble that reads something like, "Mommy, be back soon." The volunteers watch her face as she folds the note and places it in a bag. She reads the name aloud, she calls the number. The exercise is a rehearsal, but the movements are real. The care in folding, the way she covers the bag so the contents will not be exposed, the way she speaks into the phone with a tone that holds both authority and tenderness. Afterward, we sit on crates and sip the last of the coffee. The sky is now almost black. The air smells faintly of smoke from someone's stove down the road. We trade small stories that are more practical than heroic. Daniel tells us about the time his boot came off in a creek and he had to hold a blanket up around a grandma while she changed into dry socks. The nurse talks about the relief of a child who finally said their full name at the insistence of a volunteer who had taught them a game. You teach them to say their name, the nurse says, and then the thing in their chest is smaller. It fits in a pocket when it used to be a house. I think of the family that left and their pressed leaf. I think of the leaf like a small talisman, proof that someone had been seen. This, too, is the kind of work that does not make a headline. It is the stitching of a tear in the ordinary fabric of life. It is late when the call comes. The radio crackles, and Ellen answers in a voice that is both patient with static and quick with procedure. We move out with only the necessary: 1 truck, 2 volunteers. It is a neighborhood farther than our usual patrols, a place of neat lawns and street lamps that make ovals on the pavement. The dispatcher's voice is low as usual. "Possible lost child," she says. "Caller's not certain. Wants someone to check." We follow the coordinates, and I can feel the old familiar coil of tension. Never panic, never the kind of rush that clouds judgment, but that focused energy that steadies the hands. In the driveway is a woman on the phone, wrapped in a sweater as if the world were suddenly too cold. Her eyes are rimmed with white, and they dart to every passing car like a bird checking for a hawk. She sees us, and the shoulders that had been hunched under something heavy begin to unfold. "There was a little boy," she says before Ellen can ask. "He was playing in the yard, and then he ran. I went to the corner to get the ball, and when I came back, he wasn't there. I called out." A sound that might be a laugh or a sob gets caught at the back of her throat. She hands us a half-empty cup of coffee like an offering. We do the routine because routine is how we get everyone home. We walk the streets, check porches, talk to neighbors who look out from their kitchen windows. We ask the questions that narrow down possibility. When we talk to a man on a stoop who says he saw a small boy head toward the park, we thank him and mark it down. We stand with a mother whose hands tremble as she names the child for us, and we watch the neighborhood come alive in the way it does when people recognize the necessity of helping. At the park, a boy no older than 5 clings to the leg of an older man whose face is as weary as anyone's in the town. The boy is sticky with dried ketchup and holding a small truck. He looks at us with the blunt honesty of the unshy. When the man speaks, we learn that he had been watching the boy from a bench and had thought the child belonged to one of the other kids playing nearby. The man had brought the child home when he realized the boy was alone. The mother collapses the way people do when a burden is finally set down. She thanks the man with a voice that digs into his ribs and leaves something warm there. She thanks us too, but not as if we deserve it. Her thanks are a real, raw recognition of what collapsed and what rebuilt itself in minutes. Later, sitting once more at the field house, I think about the arc of a night like this. The threat had passed, the fear had diminished, and the neighborhood would sleep better for a while. The small machinery of careful questions and steady steps had done its quiet work. It was an ordinary rescue, not a story of triumph against monstrous odds. That is the point. Most of our victories are small and necessary. They are the right size for human hands. "Do you ever feel like it's never enough?" Maya asks as we close. It is a simple question spoken into a room that smells of dust and coffee and the faint mildew of the storage closets. I consider it. I have felt that way, raw and hungry after a failure, restless at the thought of all the things that slip through nets no matter how fine. But the answer I give is practical rather than philosophic. No, I say. Sometimes what we do is enough. Other times it isn't. But the measure of our work isn't whether we save everyone. It's whether, as a community, we keep trying to make fewer things fall through. We make procedures not for perfection, but for fewer heartbreaks. Ellen hands me the thermos, and I take a long swallow. The evening is redeemed in the small rituals. We lock the supply room, tally the forms, restock the first aid kits. We fold the orange cones into their crate and put the procedure cards back in the drawer. We tape a small new note to the bulletin board, names of volunteers scheduled for the next week, an extra reminder about practicing the child's name game. I walk to my truck as the moon leans over the pines. The thermos slides into its well-worn place. I lock the doors and leave a single light on the kitchen window, the pattern of the bulb soft and familiar. The road home is the same one I have driven 1,000 times. My hands on the wheel are the hands of someone who knows both how fragile and how resilient a town can be. At the end of the driveway, I pause and look back at the silhouette of the field house. For a moment, I imagine it full of small noises. The hush that comes when children nap, the clinking of mugs, the murmur of volunteers comparing stories. The image is ordinary enough to be true. I slide out of the truck and stand a moment in the cold, the light from the kitchen window behind me like a promise I have learned to keep. Then I close the door and walk toward the house, carrying the small, steady knowledge that tomorrow there will be new boots and new hands, new questions and new answers. We will teach them again how to fold an evidence bag, how to brew tea that is not too weak, how to listen for the shape of a child's name. Keeping watch is not an act of heroism for one night. It is a decision to be present for the long, ordinary stretch of nights that follow. It is to return, flourished or bruised, and to show up again. I draw my keys out of my pocket, unlock the door, and step inside where warmth waits. The light in the kitchen is steady. Outside, the darkness is still there. Inside, the light remains. I make tea, and for a while I sit at the table and write a list of things to teach the new volunteers next season. Tenderness and caution. The child's name game. Locking your truck. Keeping a thermos in the well-worn place. I set the pen down and listen to the small sounds of the house settling. Then I blow out the kitchen light and leave a single lamp by the window. It casts a rectangle of amber onto the curtains. I walk to the window and watch the road, the faint shine of tire tracks through the dark, the houses like small islands with their own little flames. I keep watch, exactly as I always have. Some nights the work asks much and returns less. Some nights it gives back the voice of a mother thanking the man on the bench. Mostly, it gives the slow, unglamorous faith that small acts can hold a town together. I breathe in the room, the air full of tea and the faint scent of rain off the pines, and I think of the pressed leaf folded in a letter on my shelf. I think of the child's lopsided handwriting. I think of all the things that are enough when added up. Lists, thermoses, notes, locks, names remembered aloud. Then I turn from the window and put on the kettle again, because tomorrow there will be a new dawn and we will need our coffee. I keep my light on. I keep my watch. I teach. I go out. I return. And I do it all over again. It is not dramatic. It is not grand. It is, like everything worth doing, tenacious as a small flame.